What film or series lit your fuse and made you have to tell stories on screen?
That's probably one of the harder questions to answer because growing up, I wanted to do video game design, if you can believe it. So I, like I think Ocarina of Time and, Chrono Cross and Metal Gear Solid kind of really got me interested in storytelling more than any individual film, only because I didn't know anybody. I'm from Alabama, and I had no idea that, at least as a kid, I guess intellectually I knew there were directors, but I didn't know anybody in the film world. I had no interaction with Hollywood at all. So it was so outside of the sphere of possibility that it never even dawned on me till I was really in college that it was a career path. That's when I started, I think, really gravitating towards film. So like a lot of movies that I loved as a kid, you go back and you rewatch them, then you start watching interesting other movies. I know as a kid, I loved Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown. So I know coming back, by the time I was in college, those were some of the first movies I was looking at in terms of inspiration, in terms of the kind of stories that I was interested in telling, if that makes sense. So, once you start to kind of really dive into film, then you kind of go back and you start to try to analyze why you like the things you like, And I think, the movies that really inspired Nicole and Tyrone, I think I tend to enter stories from a tonal place, and vibe, mood, tone first. And I think really what I love about, Jackie Brown and Pulp Fiction and Boogie Nights and The Big Lebowski, really is that tone. It's there's a very thin tightrope that they walk between drama and comedy, and for some reason, I think just the specificity of those movies, really attracts me to them, And obviously, there's storytelling influences like The Truman Show, They Live. These are movies that are more plot specific to what Tyrone is, The Matrix. Tyrone is really just The Truman Show retold through a weirder lens. But at the end of the day, it's still a person realizing that his world is not the world he thought it was, and it's more of a journey of identity than anything. So those are really the movies that kind of stuck with me as it pertained to Tyrone, and again going back to the mood and the tone of those movies. That's what really stuck with me, the idiosyncratic detail. They're so idiosyncratic, and that's really what I was inspired the most by.
On your way up, as you were making your way as first as a writer and then as a writer-director, what movie or series that you watched that was so good it made you go, my goodness, can I ever actually rise to this level?
That's an easy one. I mean, it's very specific. It's not gonna have nothing to do with the plot of Tyrone or that, but it was The Dark Knight. I remember sitting, I went down to Orlando to watch it. I'm wearing a UF shirt. I went to University of Florida. But I went down to Orlando to see it in IMAX. I was I love Batman Begins. And I was so excited. I remember sitting and the hair on the back of my neck standing up at the end of the movie when it's a watchful defector, a dark night, and the music is going and he's so we'll have to hunt him. And the music starts hitting and the dogs are chasing him. And I'm oh my God, he's about to stick the landing. Oh, he's about to stick the landing. Oh, it's about, I'm feeling I'm feeling so much endorphin burst in the back of my neck. As that climactic final few shots happen. And then he's riding on a motorcycle and the cape is, and it just cuts to black and I was well, so much for trying to be a movie director. This is right when I was getting interested in all right, maybe I should really, pursue it. Cause I was an art student. I was an art major and I was a pretty mediocre one at that. So I was like, maybe I should try to save some of my credits and say I'm gonna be a movie director and get an interdisciplinary major so that I won't have a completely useless degree that will make me no money and leave me destitute. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna do it. I had just applied to do interdisciplinary. So I had just like formally said, all right, I'm going to take these 2 years of art credits that I have and make them applicable to a film degree by finessing my way into an interdisciplinary degree, because Florida didn't have a film program. And then like I'm watching The Dark Knight, and then like I was like, I just sat in the seat like, how could I ever? Like it seemed so inconceivably just inconceivably good, like unattainable. You know, I'm like, man, back to the drawing board. I saw it like 4 times in the movies. Like I was obsessed with Dark Knight for sure in college. But Chris, he's pretty good. He's pretty good.
So now, whether it was the success of something that you did or approval from someone who mattered to you, and I know when you did the Creed 2 script, you got to work with Ryan Coogler and Sly Stallone. What gave you the confidence that, yeah, maybe I do belong here?
I mean, I think there's always going to be an undertone of imposter syndrome, and it never goes away. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, you still like, do I belong here? Like, I'm asking that right now. But, obviously that was, just, getting to, meet Sly Stallone and like sit in the trailer with him and talk about a scene. And he's so like down to earth as a writer. You don't. First time I met him in person, like, we didn't sit in a room and do the draft together, obviously. I did a draft, he does a pass, it goes back and forth. And like, you get the pre-production, like you sit down, like, I'm about to go in this trailer with Sylvester Stallone, this finna be weird. Like he gonna be looking at me like, who is this? And it was like the exact opposite. He was like, oh, he was so cool, and he's throwing out lines. He's like, man, what you think about this line? I'm like, you Rocky, bro. Like, I'm like, why you asking me? And just the fact that he was so open and engaging in terms of like with someone who was truly like a random dude off the street, fresh out of film school, and he's sitting here like really workshopping, a scene, and this is, you're talking to Rocky, you know what I'm saying? And so like, there's a level of like deference that I'm feeling, obviously sitting in the room, and I'm like hesitant to even, throw it out, but he throw anything out. But he's so much like, yo, what you think about this line? This line's stupid. I'm like, I don't know about that line. He's like, yeah, you're right. Then I'm like, oh man, Sly cool like that. Okay. Sly. And so the process is still the same. You know what I'm saying? So I had several moments like that where it's not necessarily like, oh, I belong here, because you never, I mean, who knows if you belong, that the world will tell you if you belong or not. But I think there is something about the demystification of the process where, you sit down, you're like, it's so long, but it's like, the writing process is still like, is this stupid? Do we like this? I don't know about that. What about that? You know what I mean? It's exactly like it was before I even went to film school, you know what I mean? When you're just like sitting and truly making experimental films and like have absolutely no formal training at all, but it's still a process of like even on set, like in terms of, with Tyrone, it's like Jamie Foxx. I mean, we shot the first scene, I had done a few TV episodes, and obviously I went to film school. I've never worked with anybody of Jamie Foxx's ilk, obviously. And, you have a backup plan to the backup plan to the backup plan for that first day. Because, I met him, I've talked to him, but I don't know him like that as an actor, and he comes on set like with a book bag playing music, and he's like, what we doing? Where we going? And I'm like, I blocked that scene 3 or 4 ways with our cinematographer. We walked through and had, just in case he's not feeling the way I'm thinking about the scene, I got another way to do the scene, got another way. And he was not like that at all. Again, he was completely like, what's up? You tell me what's going on. We in there. So like after that first 5 minutes, he was like, oh man, okay. The process itself is no different than working with actors when I was in film school. He's just infinitely more famous, but the process is still the same. You never really know until you sit down with somebody, like what their process is like. And I think a lot of people's processes, they might be different on the surface, but like at the core, they're very similar.
What would you say was the biggest obstacle that you had to overcome to allow you to turn the projects that influenced you into your own language as a filmmaker?
I'll go from a storytelling standpoint. I think the hardest thing really is like, it's kind of similar to the previous question, is like leaning into like my specific tastes, you know what I mean? And so like having like faith that your idiosyncrasies will be received, you know what I mean? And so it's there's an ethos to those films that are like inspiring when you're like making something, but like when it gets down to the execution, I think you're trying to lean into the things that you like. I think, the songs I like, the style of cinematography I like. I'm distilling it through my own lens. And I think that it's a bit of a leap of faith to trust that your lens is cool, if that makes sense, right? It's like, it's tough to distill the storytelling, and trust that the small deviances, that make you and someone else, are worthwhile, right? And so it's like, you could recreate, you could try to, faithfully recreate what you love about everyone's work, but like at the end of the day, you still wouldn't be able to do it perfectly anyway. Like at some point, you have to insert yourself into it. You know what I'm saying? And I think that part is scary because, that's the part that you don't want to be rejected, right? That you don't want people to like push back against, And so I think a lot of it is, going back to that sense of imposter syndrome, going back to, you don't know until you do it, and I think a lot of it is like taking that leap of faith that, your taste, your specific taste, and like, the amalgamation of all these random inspirations will, congeal into something that, someone else might enjoy. So I think it's more like trusting that something is good, to you. You can't say if it's going to be good to someone else, but I mean, trusting that you do in fact like something that you've made, I think is hard to do.
And my last question, when I was watching the film, I thought I'd seen a film about what happened when the Tuskegee Airmen were injected with syphilis, and it was basically used to find out what happens when it's untreated. A scandalous, horrible thing. And then I thought of like a more playful version, Three the Hard Way, which I remember real well, with Jim Kelly and Fred Williamson and Jim Brown, and where they had to stop this stuff from being put into the water supply that was aimed to wipe out the black race. Your movie has very much of I was also reminded of the blaxploitation movies that I grew up going to the theater and loving, and I wonder what burned in you to tell this particular story in the way you did.
It definitely came from multiple. You mean like specifically like with that blaxploitation patina that's on top of it? I mean, I think there's a history of blaxploitation films being regarded as, like B movies, if that makes sense. Even though a lot of times the subject matter is really dense, if that makes sense. So I think that there was some overlap in terms of like the way we thought about the plot that felt very much like a B movie plot, in a Scooby-Doo way. And I think that thinking about the design of the world, I think there was a lot of fun to be had mining, a lot of the presentation of blaxploitation. And I think like, spiritually kind of making a blaxploitation movie, what I mean? Like it is a wonky ending the way it goes. And when we were writing, it was like, this is crazy, and I think we like living in that tightrope where like this can go very, very poorly if it's not like executed extremely specifically. And if you don't like just 100% like commit to the premise, this is going to go like wildly sideways. And so I think like when you're leaning into building out the world, and then we knew that, you know, we more inspirations like It Follows, you know, Napoleon Dynamite. It came to creating that sense of disorientation, and we wanted like temporal dissonance, but we also wanted like geographical dissonance. So we wanted you to feel like you were in this like hermetically sealed bubble that was outside of time, you know. And when you are pairing that with just like a visual style that complements how wacky the plot is, like really, if you were write down a piece of paper, you'd be like, what? It just seemed like blaxploitation made a lot of sense.
You put 3 actors in there who are very enjoyable to watch, and that's a great ally. Do you want to do more with this, or was this a one-off, and are you on to something else?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think this is a one-off. You know, me and Tony always joke, if we ever like return to this world, it's got to be a completely different genre. Like it's like the sequel is Mystic Pizza. You know what I mean? It's like Charles Fontaine and Yo-Yo opened up a bakery. You know what I mean? It's just it had to become a complete non sequitur. And you know, in the first 5 minutes, like, man, that was crazy what happened last year, right? Yeah, and then no one talks about it anymore. And like the rest of the movie is a completely different plot, completely different genre. That's probably the way we would revisit it, because you know, it's somewhat of a, you know, not that it's a closed loop plot wise. Obviously, it's left open ended, but I think like his character's journey, their characters' journeys are at an end. Like, you know, they've already learned what. You know, if anything, what they need to learn, they've learned it, right? So in a perfect world, we would be doing something completely different.